Hello, young scholars. Mr. Martyrin here. We're continuing our discussion of the Industrial Revolution. We're moving now on to what it was like for factory workers. So in your notes, you should begin taking your notes where city life, the factory system, child labor, and working conditions for women. So this is what we're going to focus on, these four topics in today's video. All right, so hardship of early industrial life. Well, first of all, let's take a good look at the photographs. We'll have to analyze them for your next DBQ coming up. All right, they tell the story. They tell a story about city living. The Industrial Revolution, it's important to understand, it brought great wealth, but it also brought great misery. And there was we said a large number of poor migrant farmers. They began moving where? They began moving into the cities, and this is called urbanization. And if you take a good look at that picture there at the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you guys can see these tenements, outside the window. You can see people throwing their garbage out the window onto the streets. You can also see just clothes and other materials hanging down. City life was very dirty and quite frankly, it was disgusting. And you had all sorts of health problems within the cities. Most people lived in something called tenements, and tenements were nothing more than a small apartment about half the size of our classroom, where you had not only your mom and dad, but you had your brothers and sisters, maybe even extended relatives living in your tenement. Now, at this time, there is no functioning sewer system, so garbage is rotting in the streets. That's going to enable disease to spread very quickly. And that's going to be tremendously problematic for people, which is also going to exacerbate the disease and medical maladies. All right. Again, here's a blow up of the photograph that I was talking to you guys about. You guys can see just the very poor conditions outside the factory. Again, it's loud, it's noisy, there's trash on the streets. And again, this is at the time now where horse and buggies will be making their way out, and soon automobiles will be making their way in. So you have to, imagine that scene where, some people are still using the horse and buggies, some people using the cars towards the very end of the Industrial Revolution. There's chaos in the streets because remember, there's no street lanes, there's no traffic patterns, no traffic lights, no stop signs. That's really where the expression "look both ways before you cross the road" comes from, because the traffic was so unpredictable in the early 20th century. Now, the factory system itself, at the heart of the city was the factory system. All right. Men, women, and children typically worked anywhere from 12 to 16 hours a day. And they worked for really a few cents an hour, which is not comparable even to today's standards. Conditions were dangerous. Conditions were not pleasant. And typically the work was boring, and we said working with the machines was dangerous, and we said strict discipline among the factory workers was enforced. All right, so we will spend a little bit of time talking about child labor and the working conditions within the factories. Now, it's not to say that every child growing up during the industrial era went to work in the factories, because that's false. But there were large majorities of children that worked within the Industrial Revolution that were children. Right. As you guys can see, these are photographs taken from inside the factories. You guys can see just wires and rafters hanging down, cords all over the place. It doesn't look like there's a whole lot of safety features in here. Okay. Additionally, here's an earlier engraving of a man and a woman within the Industrial Revolution. They're working in a factory. It looks like some sort of press. Again, the woman wearing a long dress. Really, you don't want to be wearing baggy clothing with regard to heavy machinery. May get caught. Okay, this photograph on the right. Okay, you see a young boy with probably the foreman. Again, no safety features, no safety goggles. A lot of the things that we would take for granted in the factories simply do not exist. All right. As far as child labor goes, okay, children work just as hard as adults, even harder, and they worked for low wages, even lower than adults. So that's important. They were a supply of cheap labor. There was, don't get me wrong, there was a lot. Children still went to school, but parents typically used the children to help support the family if you were living in the city. By the late 1800s, Parliament in England and France and Germany and then the United States will act, and they will begin to outlaw and they'll limit and then outlaw child labor altogether. All right. As far as working conditions for women, and this will be our last slide, employers thought women were easier to manage than men. All right, kind of a little sexism in the workplace, which is why women were hired. They receive less pay than men, and it also takes women out of the home, which is going to double their responsibilities because when they do come home from working in the factories, they're still in charge of the household and making sure the kids are fed and the household is manageable. That burden does not fall to the man. So that's going to be tremendously problematic and puts an even greater burden on women. And it's a burden that still is of some controversy even to this day as women struggle to receive equal compensation for men. All right. If you feel we went too fast, please watch the video again, but please make sure you have the notes for city life, the factory system, child labor, and the working conditions for women.